great pleasure for me to deliver this talk for the 14th anniversary symposium in honor of Murray Rothbard's Man, Economy and State, masterpiece in Austrian Economics. And I want to thank Guido for his invitation and Mises University for his fabulous opportunity. The subject of this talk is not about Rothbard and virus, but about crime. A subject, maybe we could find a point of connection with the presentation made by Professor Bodke, because the socialist states represent one of the highest forms of collective criminal organization. Transition is already a transition from criminal organization to a society based on freedom. The question of crime is important because it permits, among other things, to distinguish the characteristic of market on which a free society is built, to separate clearly the society of cooperation and violent behaviors. Economics of crime as a specific application of instruments of economists can be analyzed for different topics. Thank you. But we choose deliberately to reduce the focus of this paper. This talk does not deal with the mechanism of anarcho-capitalist society, subject on which some contributions were made by Murray Rothbard in his book Libertarian Manifesto, or by Professor Opie in the Journal of Libertarian Studies, nor will it constitute a study on the private production of security. It will also not be about the problem of restitution or the debate on the proportionality of punishment. Our sole objective is to highlight the different and divergent contributions made by Murray Rothbard and the mainstream economists on the question of crime. To understand this difference, we follow three important perspectives: the conception of law, the enforcement of law, and the role of the state. For the neoclassical school, law is what is defined by the state. In Barnett's words, whatever the state says is law is law. Whatever the state makes a crime is a crime. Consequently, law is the outcome of a special state process which defines the titles of property and the rights. There are rights because there is a law, and not there is a law because there are rights. Bastia in his essay, The Law, has already stressed this different logic. We can note three consequences. First, some actions are forbidden although they do not constitute violation of property right. News from France, for example. The recent project of the French government on security restricts severely the activity of prostitution, although it constitutes for the most part of prostitutes and customers a valuable commercial activity. Moreover, other actions are legalized, although they represent clearly violation of property rights. Indeed, a farmer who refuses to sell his property to a government agency can see this one seized by force to build an highway. The third consequence of this approach is the place given to the economist. The economist is a social engineer who helps the political decision to assign the different rights. So, a crucial position is attributed to him. For the neoclassical economist, law is the result of rational calculus between cost and gains. Cost of defining and assigning the different rights on one hand, and the gains obtained by the advantages of an adapted definition of rights on the other hand. Law is a means to internalize the burden of externalities and to minimize the social cost. In this framework, the right depends on the result of specific calculus. That is to say, they depend on the importance of gains and cost. The rights are not absolute, but they are very relative to specific and historical conditions. The proposed calculus is based on an objective value, that is, implies the possibility of interpersonal comparison. The rights are conditional words. In fact, the mainstream economist does not think in terms of crime and peaceful exchange, but in terms of voluntary or involuntary transfer. An involuntary transfer is not bad in itself if it permits to increase the total available wealth for a society. The allocation of rights is the first step. The second one is the enforcement of rights previously defined. This process of enforcement is also the outcome of a calculus. The objective is also the same: to minimize the social losses or to maximize the highest possible wealth for a society. To this level of minimized social losses is associated an optimal number of crimes or rapes or murders, and the optimal amount for the probability of detection and severity of punishment. The notion of optimal crime is considered as a curious and meaningless thing for a libertarian or for an Austrian economist, but it is the price that must be paid for acceptance of the mainstream framework if we accept it. To sum up this first point, the neoclassical approach of law considers that the rights are conditional and depend on historical dispositions. Murray Rothbard shows clearly that this framework is characterized by an absence of theory of justice. It's only the outcome of a social and political competition and compromise subject to variation and to policy choices. In the Rothbardian framework, it's possible to understand what is a crime when a just title of property is correctly defined. Indeed, a crime is the violation of just right which rests upon a theory of property. More accurately, if we follow Rothbard, a crime can be defined and properly analyzed as a violent aggression against the just property of another individual. Crime constitutes an invasion against the property of somebody, against tangible goods on which he has just property, or against his body. So, what is a just title of property? A just title of property can be deduced from three criteria. The first one is the criterion of self-ownership, the ownership of an individual as on his own body. The criterion of stealing is the second one. The individual has just property right by mixing his labor with clay or land or raw material, for example. The third one are the principles of exchange of just held property and production with just held goods. It results from this analysis a clear separation between crimes and legitimate acts. The analysis of Rothbard represents also a tremendous calling into question of the actual practice and of some laws too. It constitutes a proposition of a new arrangement of rights by stressing the existence of present force rights which are in fact violation or crimes, and by offering a consistent defense of some activities which are unjustly and erroneously judged illegal. Walter Bloch's book, Defense of Indefendable, is clearly an application of this analysis. But to have a just right does not mean for Rothbard to have an absolute right or use of this right. Rothbard suggests what could be called a just exercise of this right. Indeed, a just exercise of a right implies that the use of just held property does not violate the just held property of another person. That is to say, that the property of another person is not invaded by the exercise of its just right. For Rothbard, it exists an absolute basis-driven property right based on theory of property, but not an absolute use of this property. Another point raised by Rothbard is the question of morality. I'm not a specialist of this question, but Rothbard distinguishes clearly law from morality. Law is relative to a legitimate use of resources, whereas morality is relative to a judgment on the means or the ends of an action. For Rothbard, an owner can use his property in the way he wants, provided not just right is deprived. You can drink alcohol, inject drugs in your blood, drive at very high speed, though it can harm your own body. You can watch specific movie, hear rock and roll songs or Eminem songs, or share extreme and special religious opinion, although you can hurt the conviction of the people. But because not just right is deprived by exerting such activities, which could be judged or perceived as immoral by others, the legitimate owner cannot be prevented from acting. In the Rothbardian framework, morality concerns only the means to attain ends and not ends themselves. To give a full sense to morality, the individual must have the opportunity to be moral and immoral, to make moral actions and immoral ones. In fact, by preventing or prohibiting the realization of some activities, the author of such actions uses first to impose his own ideas and reveals his immoral position by violating the just right of another person. Moreover, Rothbard distinguished three origins for the law: the custom of a community or tribe, the positive law as the outcome of a state influence, and the natural law. Rothbard travels clearly the natural law, discovered by reason. Natural law permits to define a rule which is universally applied independently of the consideration of time, place, color of the skin, color of hair, race, or size of a nose. When the criterion of universality is not respected, the law constitutes a means to establish a superiority of some man on other men. Then the Rothbardian framework allows to conceive two radically different orders. The first one can be called economic order. It is based on peaceful cooperation, mutual benefits, harmony, voluntary agreement, and the respect of property rights. The other one is the hegemonic or political order, based on invasion, aggression, exploitation, seizure, predatory behavior, violation of property rights, and power of men on other men. Consequently, the approaches presented by the mainstream economists of the mainstream school and Rothbard are irreconcilable because founded on two different conceptions of liberty. The second rupture between the two frameworks concerns the enforcement of law. For the mainstream economics, law can be summarized as a process of engineering, a search for efficiency. For Rothbard, law deals with justice. We show that the process of enforcement depends on the calculus. More accurately, the enforcement justifies first if it exists a net damage. That is to say, if the value of damage borne by the victim is higher than the gains obtained by the criminal. Secondly, it depends also on the cost of enforcement. If the costs of enforcement are higher than the damage done, then the right is not enforced. Again, the property rights are conditional ones. When the authorities decide to enforce a law, they must define the format of their intervention. What must be the level of detection? What must be the severity of punishment? Again, this choice depends on the results of deterrence for each tool, each instrument, and the associated cost. The authorities search the highest level of deterrence or budget, or to minimize the cost of enforcement for a specific level of deterrence. But with such a presentation, there are many shortcomings. Indeed, it supposes a possibility of fine-tuning policy. It's possible to make some trade-off on marginal elements. For example, for highway surveillance, it's possible to use 10.5 police cars, or during the next period, another period, 10.51 police cars. The policy of deterrence is supposedly totally flexible. It is also presented as being reversible, perfectly reversible. It's possible, for example, to use a jail of 500 persons for punishment and to modify 5 days after the first policy to use only 5, independently the existence and the cost of the previous investment. These two hypotheses are clearly not conform to the economic reality. More crucial is the hypothesis made concerning the information. Not only does the process of deterrence is reversible and flexible, but all the needed information concerning the different combination is available for the authorities, and the information relative to the cost of a different combination too. Another point forgotten by the neoclassical economists concerns the possibility of a situation of irresolution in which the authorities can be placed. Indeed, the available contributions made by the mainstream economists are numerous, integrating different hypotheses concerning behavior toward risk, different level of wealth among population, or limited information. The problem is that the proposed solution for public policy can be opposite, because the hypotheses are different. So, what is the solution? The last critique will make concern the conception of law as being a search for social efficiency. The mainstream economists suppose a relationship of proportionality between the harm done and the potential punishment, defined as the probability of detection times the severity of punishment. But the determination of a respective level for punishment and detection depends on the relative cost and the relative effects in terms of deterrence. Consequently, as Rothbard stressed previously, some strange situations can occur where more serious crime can be punished less severely than minor ones. In the mainstream framework, it is the potential punishment which is taken into account and not the actual punishment. We show that Rothbard proposed a definition of crime which rests upon the notion of just property. We must be used in a just manner. Another consequence of the Rothbardian analysis is that the owner of just held property owns also a just right to defend it by violence against violent invasion. The owner can ensure himself this activity, or renting the service of specialized agencies for the production of security. It may deduce from this proposition that the only legitimate use of violence is not the monopoly of state, but the individual monopoly of the owner on his own property. Consequently, from the theory of property rights, Rothbard is able to deduce a principle for a free society or an anarcho-capitalist society, but also a right to self-defense. But the just right to defend his property against invasion is limited by the rule of proportionality. By this criminal act, the perpetrator loses his own right to the same extent he violated previously the right of another person. No more, no less. The damage done constitutes the upper limit for the punishment. Contrary to the mainstream, for Rothbard, the punishment cannot be modulated. The distinction between a potential punishment and an actual one is meaningless and useless. The punishment must be a just punishment and rightfully imposed. If the punishment is higher than the damage done, the rule of proportionality is violated, and the situation indicates clearly a violation of criminal right. The perpetrator of this harmful act must be prosecuted the same way. Rothbard defends also the idea that the damage done is not composed by the loss, only composed by the loss of some rights, but also the trouble in which the victim is placed against his will. The victim must be restored in his right for his tangible components, the broken window, the broken arm, the broken car, but also for an intangible part, fear or nervous disorder. Consequently, Rothbard proposed to double or more the punishment, take into account all the components of the damage. The criminal loses his right to the same extent and must be restored the victim. Then Rothbard gives a logical answer to an old rule. You took one tooth, you give back two teeth. Consequently, for Rothbard, the goal of justice is not an objective of deterrence, but to restore by just means the victim according to the criterion of proportionality. Restitution is a guide to attain justice, an imperfect guide because of problem of valuation, but the only one available for man. However, nobody can deny that a fine could produce an effect of deterrence. So I would reconcile the effect of deterrence and the Rothbardian position. We think that Rothbard does not deny the existence of this effect, but denies to consider it must be the sole objective of justice. Deterrence must be understood as being a secondary effect or an indirect positive effect. The third crucial difference between the approach of Rothbard and mainstream economists is related to the conception of state presented as being an aggressor or a protector. For the mainstream economist, the state has an important role to play because it is a central actor to regulate and to eliminate crime. That's that? No? 3 more minutes. Okay. Only a central authority is able to determine the optimal amount of deterrence and to provide these services. This author does not ignore the potentialities of the private sector, but they consider the most important component is the public role. For mainstream economists, the market mechanisms are inefficient in some situations and are unable to protect against crime. The solution is the intervention of state, which is presented as a protector. Rothbard's position on the state is radically different. Rothbard sees the apparatus of state a tremendous concentration of power. It has arrogated to itself numerous compulsory monopolies. It buys a property, it can do it on large scale, as in Russia. For Rothbard, the state constitutes a real threat on liberties. Who can protect the people against the intrusion of state? In the Rothbardian framework, the state appears clearly as a collective criminal organization. It uses its power and political or violent means to extract illegally resources to survive. Then there are inner contradictions with the existence of state. To protect people, it has to violate some property rights of people. To ensure the creation of wealth, it has to destroy wealth. To provide public protection, it has to extract money by taxation. To finish with this conception, I want to stress another point, is the intervention of state is made easier by the efforts of an intelligentsia, by a strong apparatus of intellectuals who are paid to produce ideology, doctrines, and theories to justify his intervention. The mainstream economist can be put in this category. To conclude, there is a radical diversion between the mainstream approach and Rothbard's ones concerning the conception of law, the role of punishment, the place of a state. For the neoclassical economist, the definition and the enforcement of law are reduced to a calculus of costs and benefits, a problem of allocation of resources, a technical problem of social engineering, a search for efficiency. For Rothbard, the property rights are absolute and cannot be the object of trade-off. They are absolute, but their use is limited by the respect of just property rights of other persons. The goal of justice is to restore the victim in his right by a proportional and rightfully imposed punishment. Rothbard's approach is very stimulating because it offers new paths for further research. What are the foundations for a private system of protection? What are the implications if the victim is placed at the center of a judicial process? His theory of liberty appears clearly very useful to understand the international relationship and in this time, and particularly the question of war. Numerous challenges on which the Austrian economist point of view is necessary and for which the insight of Rothbard are simply essential.
Thanks very much.
See you.